right, Holy Happy Hour Batman. I am Father Ben. I am an Episcopal priest and co-founder of the All Ports Open Network. And on this show, I am joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world. Talk about life, faith, spirituality, game design, philosophy, and I don't know, whatever else comes up we talk about here on the show. Tonight, I am so excited. We had a last minute change of schedule. We had a cancellation. I didn't get to announce this too far in advance, which is a shame because I didn't have a ton of time to build the audience for this episode that maybe you would want to have when you have a guest you're excited about, as I'm excited about our guest tonight, because we have legendary indie ttrpg designer Vince Baker joining the show. You know Vince from Apocalypse World and Powered by the Apocalypse, and because his wife Meg has been on this show 2 different times, has come back on the show twice, and now we finally have Vince Baker here with us tonight in just a few minutes. His newest game, The Last Adventure, is on Indiegogo right now, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to get to know Vince better in just a couple of minutes, so stick around as we bring Vince on in a few minutes onto the show and get really into the chat. We see people in the chat. Dev Presto in the chat. Hey, Dev, how are you? Anybody who's in the chat, we'd love to answer your questions, so feel free to stick questions for Vince in the chat, and we will get to them later as best we can. So before we get into the thick of it with this episode, a couple really important housekeeping items for the show. This show is a production of the All Ports Open Network. You can go to allportsopen.com, check out all of our podcasts and streams. You can also check out APON Games on YouTube, or you can catch up on the 2 weekly streams we have, bi-weekly streams we have of The Worst Days. The Worst Days is a original horror TTRPG about being young, written by horror writer J.W.G. Wise, and it's an APON game, original game. As I said, there are 2 bi-weekly playtest streams of that game on Twitch. There's one tonight, right after the show, and we are going to raid right into that as soon as we're done talking to Vince tonight on Holy Happy Hour. So you can catch up on YouTube. You can catch that live on Twitch, and it'll be tonight, right after the show. We're going to stick around and we're going to raid into that. One Night at Slumpos is the name of the horror night show on Monday nights. What they're playing, and yeah, it should be really fun. So stick around, and you and me, we can all jump right into their chat together. So a couple of housekeeping things. As you can see on the screen, there is an ad for a game on the screen called Broken. Broken is a tragic romance game by me, designed by me, coming to crowdfunding beginning July 19th. It's a romance game for 2 players in which you tell the story of a breakup the story of a relationship. A spoiler, it is a breakup game. I was going to kind of lead into how it's a tragic romance game, but I kind of jumped right to the end there. But yeah, each story of Broken, this game ends the same way. It ends with broken physical objects and broken hearts. It's an artifact and ritual-based game where over 10 scenes you break physical objects and your relationship slowly breaks up. So this game is, I'm really excited about it, coming to crowdfunding in July. If you want to get notified on the launch of the game, you can follow that link on the screen, bit.ly/brokenlaunch, and you can sign up with your email address, and we will notify you when the crowdfunding for Broken goes live, and we'll just send you that one email only. So yeah, I would love to get more names on that list so people can get notified when the game goes live. This is my baby. I say it's a game and a memoir. It's very important to me, and I'm excited about bringing it to you all so that you all can play it, so that this can go into the world. The Broken is a game it's a deeply emotional game about memory and identity and loss and hope and healing and empathy building. And yeah, I'm just excited for you all to be able to check it out and play it. And to have it. So that is coming in July. You can join us on Monday, July 18th, right here on Holy Happy Hour Batman, the night before the game comes out. Jason Cordova of the Gauntlet is going to join me here on this show, and we're going to talk all about Broken. So that should be really exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. Okay, so let's get the Broken ad off the screen. It is Happy Hour. We've got a fabulous guest tonight. I'm really excited to have him on the show. Let's get rid of that and pull our cocktail up on the screen. As you can see, we have our cocktail for the week, inspired by the newest game from Vince Baker, The Last Adventure. I was channeling for this cocktail. Let's see. I wanted to have something. To me, The Last Adventure is so evocative of I don't know, feeling like you're at this point in life where you just have, you're ready to hang it up, but you have one last adventure to go on. And I wanted to kind of capture that in a cocktail. So I thought, it's your last drink of the night. It's got to be something really rich and dark and probably boozy and heavy. And at least that's where my mind went for it. And so, yeah, we have this drink, as you can see on the screen. This is a rye-based cocktail, but it also has scotch in it, like a really peaty scotch, like Lafroig, because it's like smoky and peppery. And so basically it's an ounce of rye, an ounce of scotch, an ounce of Campari, which is a Italian aperitivo, and Angostura bitters, orange bitters. Basically combine all the ingredients you see on the screen, combine them all into instead of shaking it in like a shaker. One of the ways you can make a chill drink like this that's going to be, that's you don't need to shake basically because there's not a lot of ingredients you need to combine. You want to put them into like a large glass, some sort of large glassware filled with ice still, and you just want to stir it like for 30 seconds, and then you want to pour that into your glass. You could use as a coupe glass like I have on the screen. You could use a martini glass for this too. You could even just pour it into a lowball glass, honestly, and enjoy. I would drink it without ice. I would drink it neat like that, served up like that. That's how I like it. This is gonna be like really smoky with just like a very with the Campari and the bitters. It's gonna be really like aromatic and have like a lot of dimensions to it. It's gonna be kind of a complex drink. So that's The Last Adventure, inspired by the game from Vince Baker, which is on Indiegogo right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, the link is in the YouTube notes, and we will be linking it in our chat here on Twitch in just a minute, so you can head to Indiegogo and check out The Last Adventure there. So, all right, that is the drink for the week. Let's go ahead and bring Vince on the show so we could talk about The Last Adventure and all this. So let's bring... Oh, there it goes. It took a second to load you in. Vince Baker, welcome to Holy Happy Hour.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm very happy to have you. So you have now followed in your wife's footsteps. Meg's been on the show twice. This is your first time.
Yep.
How hard are your feelings that you weren't the first baker to come on the show?
Oh, the opposite.
Yeah.
She is the first in many ways. If I was going to have hard feelings about that, I would be nothing but hard feelings.
I was saying this to Vince before the show, but Meg was such a wonderful guest to talk to, and it was honestly just like such a memorable thing that both times. I mean, because the first time was just such an amazing conversation, and she's just such an interesting person to talk to, as you know better than anyone, I'm sure. And then to have her then come back and interview me was like one of those things I'll always treasure, to say like that happened and I can remember that forever. So it was a real gift. It was a gift.
That's really cool. Yeah. No, often when I am the first to be interviewed by somebody, I spend the whole interview going, you should really talk to Meg. You should really, you would get so much out of that. She's very cool.
Yeah. So let's talk about, but we're not here to talk about Meg. We're talking about you, and I'm glad to be doing that. So let's talk about The Last Adventure. So folks, well, I guess why don't you give people, if people don't know you and your work, why don't you give like the elevator pitch? I'm Vince Baker, and this is who I am and what I do.
Okay, so I've been publishing games as Lumply Games since 2002, I want to say 2001, 2002, something like that. Publishing indie games. I started with a little tiny zine game called Kill Puppies for Satan.
What a great name. Perfect for Holy Happy Hour.
It was it's a heck of a game. And that was in 2001 or 2002, I forget. It's hard to keep track when it's zines,
Sure.
And so I've been publishing games since that day. One of my big early hits was Dogs in the Vineyard. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
Oh, I'm familiar with Dogs in the Vineyard. Maybe we revisit that because I.
We can talk about it. It's that's a kind of a. It was a challenging game for me to make, and it's a challenging game for me to have made now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to talk about it if you're interested.
Yeah.
The next one was Apocalypse World. Meg and I. We published it in 2010, the first edition with only my name on it, and then by 2016, for some reason in the early part of our publishing careers together, we thought it would make more sense for her to publish her games and me to publish my games, but it became clear that we were all working on each other's games all the time. Like and we can talk about our creative relationship too if you want.
Yeah.
It's something we talk about sometimes. But so we published Apocalypse World in 2010, kicked off the PBTA thing scene movement,
Yeah.
and school. I like to think of it as a school of design.
Okay.
When I'm feeling fancy, and we've kept making games. I've kept making weird little side projects. My main way to think about things and talk about things is to make games.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. That's what I do.
Yeah.
I come from a family of fine artists. My little brother's an illustrator. He's worked for Magic the Gathering and Legend of the Five Rings and Lucas. He's worked for Star Wars. But, he's always thinking with his pencil. He's always drawing, and that's just how he thinks about things. And I feel like that's how I am with games. I waiting in line at the RMV trying to figure out what the game of the RMV is.
I feel like once you've gotten the bug, right, for game design, like once you've started thinking about like how you gamify things or how, like what kind of games you might make, it becomes like something you can't stop. It's just like your brain just starts doing it in the weirdest places at the weirdest times, and then it's a matter of so how do you decide like what games not to work on? Like if your brain is always thinking like, oh, what if I gamified this, or like, oh, I can have this idea, to know which ideas to chase.
Yeah, well, I have a really strict policy about that, which is that if I can sleep instead of working on a game, if I can lie in bed instead of getting up in the middle of the night and turning on my laptop and hunching over it like this, if I can sleep through it, that game doesn't get made. A game has to get me out of bed, has to pull me away from watching a movie, for me to work on it. And they always do. Not every game does, but that's how I know if I'm not going to work on a game, is if I'm like, I could go work on that, but I'm kind of in the middle of this movie, then that game will never exist.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool to like learn your own process of like how, like what works for you personally for that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I certainly have been in those moments of like needing to keep going on something and like not being able to tear myself away from it. And yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought about that in terms of like you said about like that means it's worth chasing this project or not. I guess the not side of it, because I also will get to the place for something where I just need to set it aside for a while. Sure. And
yeah, of course.
We got a question in the chat about this, which is a really good question, which was, and I'm assuming it's referring to like what we're talking about right now, but was that true in the early days of your process also?
Yes. I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. Because I'm like really lazy and finishing games is really hard. And if a game can't make me do that, I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah.
And that's always been true. With Kill Puppies for Satan, I was literally staying up after bedtime, literally working through dinner, because I couldn't stop writing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, probably does it help to have now? Were you married to Meg at the time when you wrote that?
Yep.
How about your kids? Were your kids on the scene yet? Were you a parent yet at that point? I'm asking you because I'm a parent and I've got like I know how this goes for me, so that's why I'm asking you.
Meg and I, so this would have been 2001. Meg and I were working opposite shifts. So that one of us would always be home with now our two little kids. We had a 3-year-old and an infant now. And Meg came home from work and I looked up like this and she said, "How was your day?" And I said, "Well, I wrote a game." And she said, "Oh dear, oh dear." That kind of day. Yeah, so we were young parents when I wrote that game. Yeah.
Well, I'm asking because I've definitely been in those moments where I'm like, I really want to work through dinner on this thing, but how to turn this into a question?
Well, let me tell you the answer to a question we get all the time, me and Meg.
Yeah.
Which the answer is that it's really awesome. Meg's a textile historian, but a quilter. She's an artist.
Yeah.
And it's she is also driven by her muse, and she will also get up in the middle of a movie and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I know we're watching this movie together on date night, but I got to go work." And so to have that understanding
Yeah.
between us, and to have always had that shared understanding that when she has to work, she has to work. When I have to work, I have to work. When the muse demands our work,
Yeah.
we do it. And so, I'll take care of the kids while she's working. She'll take care of the kids while I'm working, and that's just always been part of our
Yeah.
relation.
Yeah, I mean, like the muse doesn't follow your schedule, right? Like you don't know when it's going
Does
to show.
not, does not.
That's tough.
And I've had friends who have not had those, whose partners and relationships haven't had that understanding. And even when they're supportive, they just don't get it. They don't understand um, that no, it's time for me to leave this movie on date night.
Yeah.
This is fun, but I won't enjoy it if I sit here and resist um, you know
Yeah.
whatever this thing is in my head that wants to get
You
out.
need to get it out. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
definitely been there. It's really tough
yeah,
when
yeah,
you have that creative thing in your head that, and you just need to kind of, like you said, get it out. It's like that's what it
yeah,
feels like, right? Like it feels like
yeah,
it's in here and it needs to come out. Like it has to.
yeah, yeah. Like it feels like it's like worse than a sneeze. Like it feels like
Mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah, absolutely.
I have this thing. There was a really funny this was before Twitter, but it was a tweet length little thing that
Sure.
writing is easy. All you do is stare at a blank page until blood forms on your forehead and drips onto it.
That's good. That's and
Yeah,
true, right? That's it. That's it right there. Well, so speaking of sort of that creative process and sort of like the birthplace of your games and your creativity, tell us about the last adventure, and then we can kind of get at where that, kind of came from.
sure. So the last adventure, it's deceptive. It's a really little book. It's a 40-page zine or whatever. Um, but it's I've been doing this for 2 decades now, and it's 2 decades worth of work has gone into that game. It's deceptive. Um, but it's much bigger than the text. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely do.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's the third in a series of sword and sorcery games. The first one is called The Wizard's Grimoire. The second is called The Barbarian's Bloody Quest. They're standalone games. You don't need to know them or anything, but they share a world and they share a rough system. And in The Last Adventure, you are an old warrior and hero who long ago set your sword aside, and now in your old age you've died, uh, and you come to on the shores of death, and there's no heroes welcome. The ancient heroes aren't there to greet you. Your family isn't there to greet you. The loves and friendships of your youth, and the nobody brings you, it says, nobody brings you the sup of oblivion. um, and so you stand up on the shores of death, and you take up the memory of your old sword and the memory of your old shield, and you decide to make your last adventure in the land of death. um,
Ah, love it.
if there's
I
no
love it.
heroes welcome, then there's no heroes welcome. You'll receive no heroes welcome.
Oh, it's
And
so good.
so the game is about that adventure. The goal of the game as a player, what the text says, is that your goal as a player is to take your time with your last adventure and decide slowly, thoughtfully, but inevitably decide whether you're going to see it through to the end, or stay somewhere and find oblivion in death.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's what it's about.
Wow. Yeah. So, like, you said how long did you say you've been working on this game?
Oh, this game in particular, I probably made it in 2019, something like that.
Okay.
And then I've revised it a couple of times in small ways. But it's really about, okay. So Meg and I met in 1990, and we started playing Ars Magica. Do you know that game?
I
Um,
do. I know that game. Not really.
but you've heard of it?
It's like, yeah, vaguely familiar with it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
So
okay.
yeah.
So it's a medieval European, you're wizards.
Okay.
But it's a very slow moving kind of I know that word, contemplative
Yeah.
contemplative game. um, where you're students of wizardry, right, and scholars of wizardry and scientists of wizardry. You're not wizard warriors. I mean, you might be, but it has rules for spending season upon season upon season in the lab developing a spell, stuff like that.
That's cool.
And we met in college, and we hooked up with our friend Esther, who was also really into medieval history, and we played this game. And then Meg and I played it with various other groups in various configurations for the next 15 years, something like that, 16 years. I think we stopped playing it. The last time we played it was in 2006. By then, we were playing it, the three of us, with our friend Emily Care-Boss. Do you know Emily?
I do. I had Abadiah on the show, and I know Emily's work as well. I mean, well, I'm a romance game designer, and I'm a huge fan of the romance trilogy. It's one of the biggest, most influential things on my work. And Emily has not been a guest on the show, but she already knows this. The invitation is always open for Emily to come and talk about romance games on the show. But anyway, sorry, go on with your story.
Yeah, no, she's extremely cool. We've been friends with her since 90 or 91. Also, we've been housemates. Our dear friend Emily, and so we were playing just the three of us in this co-GM'd freeform Ars Magica. That was very, very interesting, and it was interesting thematically, and it was interesting structurally. From a game design point of view, the things we were doing were really compelling in action, because we didn't have a GM, we didn't have an authority. Instead, we were each independent authorities. And I'll say a little bit more about this, but I want to get the history out. And so it was really compelling in play, and it really resisted game design. I couldn't figure out how to say, here's how to play this way. The stuff you can get out of playing this way is pretty cool. Here's how to do it. And the Wizard's Grimoire. So Ars Magica captures, not Ars Magica, Apocalypse World captures some of it. Yeah. There's some stuff in Apocalypse World, like the way that Apocalypse World is driven by questions, by the power that a move gives you very often is that you get to ask a question and you get to expect an answer to it, right? And so that comes out of that experience of playing with Meg and Emily. And then the Wizard's Grimoire series, including The Last Adventure, goes even a little further and captures something even a little more serious about what we were doing. And how it works in those games is that I'm playing in this case, the warrior who's died in the Land of Death. And I need two friends, so like you and Meg are going to volunteer to play with me. And you don't need to do anything but answer my questions. You don't need to prepare anything. You don't need to prepare anything. You don't need to have any continuity, you have no responsibilities as GMs but to answer my questions. And when I ask a question, you and Meg have to agree to the answer before it's a real answer.
Okay.
And it's, part of it is that way, neither you or Meg has to do much creative lifting, right? You can build off each other's work in this really energized way. So like if I say, I come to a place where, what happens in The Last Adventure, I come to a place where there's this tyrant is trying to raise power among the dead souls in the Land of Death to make himself something other than dead. Like, I don't know what.
Yeah.
What's the first sign of this that I see? And so, I tell you that, and then I ask, I meet one of his soldiers. What does the soldier look like? And instead of that being all on you, you and Meg can sort of brainstorm what this soldier would look like. And so it takes a lot of the creative load off, right? And then once you two together arrive at what this soldier looks like. And I can say, what's his attitude? Like I'm walking forward. I'm not afraid or ashamed or anything. I've got my sword and my shield.
Yeah.
How does he respond to me? And then you and Meg can talk about how he responds to me, and then decide how he responds to me. And so part of the reason there are two of you is to take some of the creative load off, so that you don't have to be improvising answers all the time, which is hard work. But the other part of it is that when the two of you agree to something, it suddenly becomes really true. If you're just telling me things by yourself, I can be skeptical about them. But if you and Meg agree that something is true, I can't be skeptical about it anymore, right? Like I'm outvoted or whatever, And so when you and Meg decide that, I don't know, it's hard work to describe what a soldier looks like.
Sure.
It's hard work to come up with something interesting. When you decide that he's wearing a blindfold,
sure,
together, you decide that he's wearing a blindfold. I go, oh, instead of being like, really, a blindfold? If one of us had just said that, but since the two of you have agreed to that, now it's real. And so it's both easy and compelling. And I think that's what we did. We did a lot of that when we played Ars Magica. Meg and Emily were independent authorities, and if I had a question, I would just ask it, and they would answer it. And so when I say that The Last Adventure has 20 years of game design, it's really because I've been working on these problems, thinking about this thing that we did for 15 years in the 90s and aughts.
Right.
How do I communicate that to anybody else? How do I teach somebody how to play?
How to do that?
How do I show this thing that we did?
Right.
And so I've been,
it
builds on. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's really fascinating to me that when you think about, I think when you traditionally think about GMing, you think about the fact that the question, I think that the natural inclination for most people is to think about the questions coming from the GM. Like, well, what is one of the ultimate Powered by the Apocalypse questions, right? It's, what do you do? And that's really kind of the ultimate TTRPG question in general from the GM. Like, what do you do? But usually questions, at least seems to me, traditionally would be GM to player oriented, right? Like that's the direction of the question. So it's fascinating to me that this is a reverse of that it's a question that goes from player to these other two. What do you call the other two? Is there a name for?
There isn't. Like, they're GMs. They're in every way that matters. They're GMs. The book says that you'll need two friends who will volunteer to play with you, and it says ask your volunteers, but they're GMs. I think it's appropriate to call them GMs. Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that it's like a reversal of that, like, direction from which the questions are oriented.
Yeah. And it's a really hardcore reversal. Like, it goes beyond just how the questions are oriented. I have this book that gives me character creation rules and my moves in this game. They're called exertions. And you don't need to see that book. You don't need to know what's in it. You don't need to know anything about it. You never call for me to roll dice. I choose when to roll my own dice.
Wow.
I interpret my rules for myself. The rules for playing this adventurer are contained to me, except that I ask you questions all the time about what I see and what I hear and what happens. I can roll my dice behind my hand over here and say, this one's going to be easier in the Barbarian's Bloody Quest. So in the Barbarian's Bloody Quest, which is the game that came out before. They're independent games, but you are a barbarian. You were deeply wronged by a wizard. You don't know what wizard it is. All you know about this wizard is that when you cut this wizard open, orange light will spill out. So your quest is to cut open every wizard you meet to see what spills out. You'll know you've got the right wizard when orange light
spills out. Okay.
So one of your moves in the Barbarian's Bloody Quest is to ready yourself for battle. So if you imagine, I'm standing there and whatever, I've run afoul of a wizard's guards and there's 10 guards facing me, right? So I roll dice and it lets me choose things, and I'll choose things that are like, my hand is on my sword if any of those 10 guards thought that I would submit without a fight, they give up and go home. Which ones give up and go home? Do any of them give up and go home? And so you don't need to know how I arrive at that question. Those rules just work back here. I do. But then I ask you, I tell you, if any of them have families to go home to, they give up and they leave. Which ones have families to go home to? Which ones give up and leave? And so you don't ever call for those roles. You don't ever, the rule for you, I hand you this little handout that says, thanks for agreeing to play with me. Your only responsibility is to answer my questions. You don't have to say anything if I'm not asking you a question. You can, you can prompt me or provoke me or whatever you want to do. But the only thing the game needs you to do is answer my questions.
I wonder if there'll be folks who get into that environment and then they chafe at it, like they want to do more. They want to,
as the GMs.
Yeah.
Well, then they can. Okay. Like there's no rule that says you can't say whatever you want to say.
Sure.
You're doing me a favor by playing with me. You can say, I'm not going to tell you not to say things. The only rule is that please answer my questions and that you don't have to do anything else. I've never had the experience myself when I'm working with another GM, which I've done a fair amount. I've never had the experience where I wish I was the only one, where I wish that they would shut up and let me take control of it. I find working with another GM incredibly rewarding and easy. Just because, well, it's like I said, we can build on each other's ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm such like a collaborative person in that way. When I'm running games, I feel like as a GM, it's one of the reasons why I like Powered by the Apocalypse so much, is that like I always swear that my ideas are not the best ideas. I'd much rather kind of build off of other people's ideas. And so the idea of like a conversational game that really leans into, it's not so much as the GM about me, it's about asking the right questions of the players and like following the conversation and building on them and letting them be involved in the creative process. And so the idea of like, I don't think I've ever maybe I've co-GM'd and I don't remember. And it's, I guess I have co-GM'd sometimes, but I've never played a game where it was intentionally structured that way, where you co-GM. And I think that sounds really rewarding, because then I always know I can talk it through with somebody else if I'm not confident about my ideas.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
It sounds almost like, in some ways it reminded me, as you're describing it, of like the experience of playing a solo game, but instead of like a book that you're conferring to for like answers to your questions, like you have two people who can answer your questions.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a solo RPG where the book is these two GMs who could then that just like means that the creative possibilities are just so incredibly broad, because instead of a static amount of answers that a book might give you, that are already pre-written, it's limitless.
Yeah. And it starts out, if this is the first time that you and me and Mag are sitting down to play, it starts out really kind of open and really kind of random in that way, oracular, in that way. But we develop, you and Meg between you, and then the three of us develop a shared world and a shared aesthetic and shared principles for our world very quickly. And they're really solid. If you've never experienced that, doing world building with another person or with a couple of other people, the game's designed so that you can play it with two strangers and it's fun, but the more the three of us invest in it, the more profound it can be, the more dense and the more nuanced and rich it can be.
Yeah.
And my vision for the game is not that the three of us play the last adventure over and over and over.
Hmm.
It's that I'm playing the last adventure with you two, and you're playing the Barbarian's Bloody Quest with me and Meg, and
Hmm.
Meg is playing the Wizard's Grimoire, and maybe even at the same time.
Hmm.
Like,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Everyone's playing it. Yeah, that's fascinating. You can ask your
yeah,
questions. That could be a little confusing, but that sounds really fascinating.
sort of. Yeah, you ask the other two players,
Right.
and that begins to get at how
Mm.
Megan, Emily, and I played
That's
for
so cool.
for all those years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So content wise, like the Last Adventure is, I don't know if I have come up with, I've been trying to come up with the right word for it, but it's such an evocative theme, right? Like, you're on your last adventure, you're in the land of the dead or in the land of death, but you're not done. There's no hero who's welcome. Like that's so. Other than evocative, I don't have a better word. Like it's so rich. Like it's so. I'm just curious, like why that? Why that theme? Why that? Where did that come from for you? This idea of like this story of someone's last adventure in the land of the dead. Like where did the energy and creativity for that come from?
Uh, a lot of places. That's a great question. A lot of where do you get your ideas questions are not great, but that's a really good. I would love to talk about that one in depth. Have you ever read Tanith Lee? Any of her Sword and Sorcery?
No, no,
Um, have you read much Sword and Sorcery? Like, do you know
not
a
really.
little bit?
Not really,
Oh,
actually. Yeah.
yeah. So, Tanith Lee was an English fantasy and horror novelist. She died 2017, 2016, something like that. Um, and she uh, was amazing, amazing. Her fantasy, her Sword and Sorcery is really spectacular. And she has a series of novels called the Flat Earth um, novels that take place before the Earth became round in the sort of mythic past when the Earth was still flat. And one of them is about um, the Lord of Death. And the Lord of Death in her novel is kind of this passive character, as death maybe would be, um, who then there's an ambitious human being who decides to become death's servant and sort of imposes herself on death in this uh topping from the bottom kind of way. Like she's like, I'll be your servant. And he's like, what do I need with a servant? And she was like, oh, I'll show you what you need with a servant. And so she kind of takes over death's domain. Um, and so there's a lot of action that happens in the land of death in that book, for instance. Um, the idea of the retired warrior who's called back into duty, even like Unforgiven, even westerns, you see it. In every fantasy game I've ever played, probably there's an innkeeper who's a retired
Mm.
warrior
Mm-hmm.
who, like, you always want to see him called back into duty, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
always want to see him called back into adventure. And so you're that character. Um, One of the big inspirations was Samurai Jack.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, where the evil future of Aku is the land of death.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, the other thing about all of these games, this series of games, is that they're games about wizards. And I have a lot of opinions that are really ridiculous about wizards. It's ridiculous to have opinions about wizards in the first place. I have a lot of opinions about wizards. Um, I can't not talk about Jack Vance. Jack Vance never wrote about the Land of Death, um, although many of his books have an adventurer who comes into an alien world and has to travel across it and make their way back out. Um, and Alien if you've never read Jack Vance, like I can't explain
Mm.
that it means sort of it's not like it's and if you've read Jack Vance, you understand my frustration. Um, the alien worlds are they're both alien fantasy worlds. They're both other dimensions or other fantasy realms. Like you're in this sort of D&D sense. You're in this other fantasy realm. You're in the realm of elemental wind or whatever. Or you're in the but they're also alien planets with alien life forms and and that dude could write.
Mm.
And so there's this journey through this forbidding, metaphorical, hallucinogenic kind of world. Comes out of Jack Vance too. But many of my opinions about wizards are about Vancian magic.
Okay.
And oh my God, this is nerd stuff right here.
That's right. Yeah, really nerdy here on this show tonight.
So, if you've never read Vancian magic, I guess in D&D it means that when you cast a spell, you forget it.
Okay.
Jack Vance, that was a feature of some of the spells in Jack Vance's fantasy. But Vancian magic. So, The Tempest, Shakespeare?
Yeah.
So at the beginning, Shakespeare has this special effects problem where he has to show a shipwreck and a tempest and there's some kind of fire on board the ship and all this stuff, but he's on a stage, he can't do it. And so he has Prospero lead Ariel through it. And did you create a fire on the ship? And did you smash the ship under the rocks? And did they weep and wail? And Ariel is saying, exactly as you told me to, that's what I did. I crashed over the waves and I tore the wind, whatever. And I can see Jack Vance going, well, what if you had to do that? What if spirits were really lazy and didn't want to do what you want? And I think in that Ariel even, well, anyway, I don't know, whatever. And so Jack Vance's magic is really, it's about imposing your will on reluctant forces, but you can't impose your will on them. You have to
negotiate with them.
Yes, but you also have to trick them into doing things. You also have to put up with their weird stuff. There's a spell, an act of magic in one of his later books where our hero, the wizard, there's a demon that's been bothering him, and it flies away, so he sends a spirit after it to see what it's doing. And it flies away. The demon flies away in the shape of a moth, and he sends a spirit in the shape of a dragonfly to follow it. And then the dragonfly comes back later and reports to him that he followed the moth, and it went to a window where there was a candle behind it, and there were about 1,000 million other moths there. And he lost track, the dragonfly spirit, lost track of which one was the moth spirit, which one was the demon, but kept careful watch. And after a little while, one of the moths dropped to the ground and took human form and walked away. But he figured the odds that was the same moth were really low because there were like 1,000 million moths there, and he couldn't be sure that was the same moth. And then nothing else really happened, and he considered his duty well discharged and would like to be rewarded for it now, right? And the wizard's like, okay, but fine, and so it's this really funny the idea of forgetting a spell once you've cast it is actually very funny, and it's part of the malicious humor and the slippery nature of trying to impose your will on forces that are not subject to your will, that you forget the spell when you've cast it. And for Jack Vance, that little feature of some of his spells was part of the joke. And then Dungeons and Dragons does its thing with it, and it's not funny in Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
Right? It's a tactical consideration at best.
Right.
So I write the Wizard's Grimoire, which is about a sort of ambitious minor wizard who has a grimoire that's too powerful. You have a spell book that you need to unlock and study and learn from, but it's beyond your arts. And so the game is about negotiating that process, is about unlocking and learning and deciphering this spell book. And then the Barbarian's Bloody Quest, of course, is about wizards. And the last adventure, one of the ways it can go is that you can hear a voice calling you to face danger and come to me. I need you, come to me. And I'll cover your ears. This is a spoiler. And it's a necromancer who does not have your best interests in heart, who is not going to reward you, who's going to ask you to go out into the world and commit violence for no reason. And so one of the ways the game can go is, do you, for a chance to be back in the world, do you become this wizard's thing? And sitting here right now, I don't know, maybe. I can see why I might under some circumstances, depending on how things are going for me in the land of death and who I've met and who I've remembered and what I've forgotten. So they're all games about wizards. And so as I'm coming to write the third game, I'm thinking about necromancers, and I'm thinking about this retired warrior, and I'm thinking about Tanith Lee's death book, Death's Master is the name of the book. So
yeah, I'm just thinking about how I'm just thinking about how, like, it's so much of that is, I don't know how to phrase it. So much of that concept, right? Like, whether it's going into the land of the dead in some fashion and returning, or going up against death in some way, or as you pointed out, like, just the trope of the adventurer who is at the end or retired coming back for one last adventure. All those are like well-worn tropes for a reason, right? I mean, going into the land of the dead and coming back is such a mythic, I don't know what, like, it's such a repeated myth, right? Like, and I don't know, I'm just curious, like, there's something about that, right, that's so powerful, about what it means to be a human being, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. And there's also, I don't know if you saw it on Twitter today, I want to it's also this particular game, it's about adulthood. When I became an adult, when I washed up on the shores of adulthood with the tide rack, I didn't get a hero's welcome. There was no celebration. We don't in this society we've made. At least for my generation, and I presume for all the generations that have come after. We reach adulthood unprepared for it, and
well, that's a really interesting place for you to locate it, because my mind went to, like, sort of later in life. I mean, I work with a lot of people as a priest who are, coming towards the end of life, coming towards and their last figuring out what their last adventure is going to be. I mean, like literally, like, people facing their retirement, people facing empty nest, people facing their death, which I, like, literally have to, I literally not have to, but I literally work with people who, how will I approach that adventure? So my mind went to sort of that place. So it's really fascinating to me that you kind of locate it in time with, like, this idea of approaching adulthood. I hadn't thought about it in that way. as being like, here I am, now I have come through adolescence, and I am ready to face the world as an adult, and oh, there's no hero's welcome for me. Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's not what the priests told me it would be.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. Yeah.
Um, the in in the years like 2005, 2006, 2007, I guess. Meg and I, between us, went to 7 funerals, I think, for family members. And then in the past few years, we had our first Zoom funeral.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and so there is also
Yeah.
that element of death and grieving. Like it's not only about adulthood. It is about, um, where is my dad now?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what adventures, who would my dad be on his last adventure? You know what I mean?
Mm.
Who would he meet and what would he do?
Wow.
Um,
And you're a parent like I am, and my mind also kind of goes to the idea of, well, so there's sort of two sides of that, right? There's like your own children becoming adults, and like, that idea of entering into adulthood from a parental perspective. But then I'm also thinking about, like, as a parent, I sometimes think about like what my children's imagination might be of me. Like if you were saying your father, like your father,
Yeah.
like what's his last adventure? And then the idea of like thinking about it from the reverse of that, like me going into, the great unknown, and what my children might be thinking about as I'm entering my last adventure. And that says a lot about what they think about me and what they know about me. And I don't know, there's a lot. There's a lot
there's
there.
a lot there. Like, I uh and you make a dumb little game about wizards, a dumb little game about a dude with a sword, but there's
Mm-hmm.
but that's not fair. Our imaginations are our humanity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And making a game where we imagine together as friends, imagine approaching life after it has ended, where, you know, you and Meg are my volunteer GMs, and you have this little book called In the Land of Death that you can refer to. When I ask you questions, I tell you, hey, by the way, look in Among the Dead and choose one of those options.
Mm.
To answer my question. I'll ask, who do I meet? And you can look to this, and and it's just a spread of people I might meet that you can choose from. But they're people like the first person I ever killed as a warrior, a friend when I was young who I haven't seen, and I'm just kind of on this sword and sorcery adventure, and then suddenly you're being like, yeah, this is the first human being whose life you ever took,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
walking toward you. Do you recognize them? And I'm like, shit, do I excuse me.
No, you can swear. It's all good.
All right.
You're good.
So I'm like, I don't know. Do I recognize this person? What impact did this person have on my life? And so as friends, to use our imaginations to talk about, this is a childhood friend I haven't seen. This is a family member I've lost. This is an enemy who I hurt, and now I'm confronting them after death. I can't just say I made a dumb little game about a guy with a sword, because we are using our imaginations together to talk about these things. And it's not, I shouldn't belittle that just because it's, Dungeons and Dragons or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you can, like, jokingly, right? But then the reality is, like, there is no, I don't know, what to say about it. The space that you're creating, right, that you're going to play in, it's just it's the space that deals with these very intense and real topics, and it lets you do it almost because you're playing and because you have these guardrails of the game, right? It's like that's going to make it even more likely that you're going to get into those kinds of rich spaces because the guardrails help you go deeper, right? At least that's what I think.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really exciting. I hope people will check out the game on Indiegogo. And so one of the things we kind of talked about before the show, and I thought about bringing up that we can kind of get into a little bit, is you're funding the game on Indiegogo. So move away a little bit from the philosophical here and talk a little bit about funding it and everything. That was an intentional choice to leave Kickstarter, leave a funding platform, that you're more familiar with, go into the next adventure of Indiegogo. How is that going? What was that decision making like? From a sort of practical. Well, you can have as much creative energy as you want for these games, but you kind of have to fund them, and you kind of have to reach an audience, and so there's a whole practical side to it.
And I don't know about you or who is listening right now, but for many of us, for me for sure, and for many of us, talking about money is hard.
Yes.
Kind of uncomfortable, but
of course, make sure you're discuss this with me at whatever comfort level you have. Of course.
No, that's not. Yeah. Of course. What I like to say is that money is water and sunlight for your game. You can't create. You can create, but you can't give a game or a creative project maybe the water and sunlight that it needs without money. My old AP English teacher in high school used to say that an unwritten thought is an incomplete thought. And I would add that an unpublished text is an incomplete text, meaning that the life of a thought is you have it and then you express it and then you give it to its audience. And without money, your ability to give something to the audience, to put it in front of the audience that it's for, is limited. So that's why I'm selling games. And I mean, also it's more fun to make games than to work. And so that's why I'm selling games. But it was hard to choose. Some of my friends and colleagues have written off Kickstarter. Because of its cryptocurrency proposal. I haven't. Kickstarter is a union shop, and that means a lot to me. Indiegogo is not a union shop, and if it were just that, I would go with Kickstarter, just for that. But Kickstarter has proposed this ill-conceived crypto thing, and philosophically, well, not even philosophically, it's in my best interests for no platform to have a monopoly on me, and so I think many of us have always wanted Kickstarter to have competitors. It's in our interests for there to be our choice of platforms, and it's in Kickstarter's interest, obviously, for there not to be our choice of platforms. And so going with Indiegogo, Kickstarter as a competitor is a plus. Kickstarter is crypto thing is a plus toward Indiegogo. Kickstarter's union thing is a plus toward Kickstarter. So it's not a cut and dried thing for me. It's not that I've left Kickstarter. It's a little bit that we'll find out if Kickstarter keeps me. But I'm still open to that. But it's going okay. It's hard to judge a project because I don't know. Obviously, I don't know what this project would have done on Kickstarter. I don't know whether it would have taken off, but more than it has. I don't know. I can't compare this to an imaginary thing.
Right.
I can say that it is about where about where the Barbarian's Bloody Quest was, which was on Kickstarter. That was this past fall.
Yeah.
And so it's going okay.
Yeah.
I don't have any big complaints or big concerns about making that switch.
Yeah.
It's about where the Barbarian's Bloody Quest was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the indie TTRPG sort of industry community sort of reacted very strongly when Kickstarter announced its NFT proposal, and my I don't have a lot of like personal feelings about, not that I'm sitting here supporting NFTs by any means. I don't have a lot of personal feelings in reaction to their proposal. I don't even really know that I understand it completely or enough to really have feelings about it. But I did think it was interesting that I think, yeah, I'm kind of two minds of it, right? Like, on the one hand, I think, yes, absolutely, like, there shouldn't be the fact that Kickstarter kind of had a monopoly on funding for our industry. That's not going to be good for us, period. Like, it's just not. But on the other side of that, to like the strong reaction to like, hey, we're all going to collectively kind of ditch our funding platform that we reliably use to fund our industry, seems also bad for our industry at the same time.
A little bit terrifying. But yeah, I think that there was like Kickstarter is kind of uncool. Well, the whole thing is kind of uncool because I'm making this little game and I'm selling it, and other people are making little games and they're selling them, crowdfunding them, particularly on, let's say, Kickstarter, but it doesn't really matter. And some of them do better than others.
Yeah.
And there will inevitably be resentments.
Yeah.
And those resentments, some of them will inevitably land on the platform. And I think that Kickstarter also had effectively a monopoly on those resentments. And so their crypto proposal became kind of a lightning rod for those many years of resentment.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. That really is interesting, and that makes sense. I mean, we've been using itch.io to itchfund games, and obviously Itch is not like Kickstarter, like Indiegogo. It's not a platform created necessarily for the purpose of crowdfunding, but can be used for crowdfunding in this way that people have kind of creatively used it for. And we crowdfunded a game with it in May, and I'm going to be releasing the ebook of my game that way, crowdfunding it that way in July. And I've seen the numbers from people. I know that it's like Kickstarter just dramatically, like just the numbers, Kickstarter just dramatically raises more money by like just a massive amount more than the nearest like runner-up kind of competitor on average for TTRPGs, than the other ones. And I know that what's been really interesting to me, though, is could be what you just described as that resentment building. It could be some of my own sensitivity to it. But I think I have truthfully detected at least some amount of inherent skepticism that you're not using Kickstarter. Like, oh, you're releasing that game. Are you going to release it on Kickstarter? Oh, you're releasing it on this other platform. And there's like an inherent like, oh, like as if like, and that's interesting, right? That just shows you the power of the company Kickstarter. That like, does it really say something about my game that I'm releasing it on this platform and not this one? Because I don't know that it does. I mean, beyond the fact that we're funding an ebook right now and not a physical book, which I do think there's a lot there, right? People really like physical books, and I get that. But setting just that part of it aside, like, it's interesting that the choice of platform, you know what I'm saying? That it has that kind of like shapes the people's perception of the product, the game.
Yeah. With, as far as I can tell, no basis in reality. Like setting up a Kickstarter project is very similar to setting up an itch game or setting up an Indiegogo. Like it doesn't take more work. There's no more vetting. It really does not reflect on the project.
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating.
Really
it's really fascinating, and that just says that. Well, like it's the years of. I mean, like, look, what's the ultimate thing for a brand, right? When your name of your brand becomes synonymous with the thing itself. So, like, like, hey, like when I remember the first time I heard someone use the word Google as a verb.
Yep.
And like that's it, right? And Kickstart, like I'm gonna kickstart that. Boom, like that just shows you the power of their platform and their brand. But yeah, the fact that it like has become, I guess, so thorough, it's been and using other platforms to shop. So I guess that's all to say. Like, that's the reason why it's good to use alternatives like you've chosen to do with Indiegogo, right? To like help kind of remove some of the power that company has. Yeah.
It's hard to think about, sooner or later we're going to kickstart, let's say, or we're going to crowdfund.
See?
Yeah.
So funny.
Apocalypse World 3rd edition, for instance. That's going to happen sooner or later.
Okay.
Are we going to risk that? Mm-hmm. Or are we going to go back to Kickstarter because it's because those numbers are bigger, just because it has the track record of. There have been a couple of really, really promising, really good off Kickstarter indie projects recently that make me feel like there could be competition.
Yeah, I mean, the success of Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast, for one, like being big on Indiegogo and just doing so well on that platform, I think was very encouraging. For one.
That is the precise one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is terrible. I'm not going to remember the name of the project. Jian Shim. Do you know?
Oh yeah.
She did one that was independent. That she didn't use an established platform. She ran the whole thing herself, and it did very well. Mm-hmm. I wish I could remember the name of the game.
I'm spacing on it too. That's
too bad.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Well, it may come up. We may remember. Someone in the chat maybe will remind us and post it. Yeah.
Gorgeous art on that game. It's gorgeous, like blue and white.
Yeah.
Image. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm embarrassed.
Oh no, it happens. Trust me, it happens to me all the time on this show.
It happens to me all the time too, but I am embarrassed. I do apologize.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I hope, again, I was there when Kickstarter started. I'm kind of Kickstarter's been sort of close to the indie RPG circles that I move in. My friend Luke Crane, for instance, was director of games at Kickstarter for years.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't wish ill upon Kickstarter, except that I wish ill upon all monopolies,
Yeah, right.
And legitimately, their interests and my interests are not the same, and it should not surprise them or me that our interests don't align.
Yeah.
And I can't be basing my business on their interests.
Absolutely. Well, so switching gears really hard here, I want to go back to a question someone asked in the chat ages ago. We didn't answer it because we had already by the time I saw it in the chat, we had moved on from your like early design period we were talking about, your early days. But Blake Ryan in the chat did ask a question, and I think we can kind of tie this into a question that I had. The question that Blake Ryan asked in the chat was, did you go to Ren fairs? And and I think it's a good question. Did you go to Ren fairs? You can answer that. And I'm also curious about your early TTRPG days too. Like that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Because I love asking people's like TTRPG origin stories. Like, how did you start playing? That's maybe for some people like you, that's a well trod. Like you've answered that question 1,000 times, but I don't know the answer. So I like to ask.
I have, but it's a fun story. I don't mind
Sure.
telling it at
Okay,
all.
good. Glad.
So I've been to a few Renaissance fairs.
Sure.
I've been in the SCA on and off. The SCA is a more participatory reenactment thing than Renaissance fairs. Um, I'm not like active or eager, but
Sure.
but yes, I have been to the odd Renaissance fair. Um, I got started playing role-playing games when I was 9, so this would have been 81, let's say 80, 81. And my uncles, who were about the same age as me, my mom's youngest siblings, they had an Atari 800, and we would play Zork.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
heck out of Zork. Me and my uncle Benjamin, who's effectively my cousin, um, would play Zork. And then when the computer wasn't available to us, I would be the computer and Benjamin would be the adventurer. And we started out, I made him write things down, and then I would write down the answers and hand them back to him on the paper. That lasted for 10 minutes or something before we were just talking. And so that was my first role playing. Was I was the computer and Ben was the adventurer, and we were spinning off of Zork. And I didn't play a published role playing game then until late high school. You know, in middle school, Benjamin's older brother, my uncle Timothy, played Traveler, and I wasn't allowed to play because I was too young. And my friend Jeff Moon, his older brother played Dungeons and Dragons, but we weren't allowed to play because we were too young, and also it was satanic. And but I kept doing this random thing with my friends who were into it, where I was just make things up and we would just play. I was exposed to the idea of role-playing games. I had looked through Dungeons and Dragons books, but I didn't play a published game until my junior year in high school, something like that. The first published games I played were Shadowrun and Talislanta.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. So that's how I got into roleplay. And so by then I had already designed, like it was a high schooler's game design, role-playing game system. But I'd never played Dungeons and Dragons, so at least there's that. At least it was weird.
Yeah.
If I had played Dungeons and Dragons, I'm sure it would have been just like Dungeons and Dragons. But
sure.
So that's how I got into role-playing. And yes, I went to a Renaissance fair or two.
So it's, I mean, it can't be lost in you, right? That like in some ways you're just still doing the same thing. Like when you described the like 9-year-old computer, the Zork, but on paper and pencil. Like I'm thinking like, okay, so this is literally the same thing you're publishing now.
Literally, I have been doing this since I was for 40 years. I have been doing this.
We're big fans of Zork at the All Ports Open Network, and yeah.
Oh my God, do you know GrewScript?
I don't. Josh, my co-founder, probably does because he's like a really, really deep person on all those things. Okay. Oh, it's new.
I'm going to embarrass myself again. It's new. Yeah. I can't remember the designer's name, the creator of GrewScript. I'm so sorry, my friends. I forget all the names. But we've talked, like he's given me excellent customer service as I've been like, how do you do this thing? It's really slick.
Okay.
Are you looking it up?
I'm trying to, yeah. Here,
I'll find it.
I didn't. My Google search did not come up with the right results. So yeah, I was gonna try to find it real quick, but if you can, that would be great. We can share it with people. And just while you're doing that and while you're looking it up, I'll just echo the comment from Blake Ryan in the chat that's about Shadowrun, because you mentioned Shadowrun, which is good but lots of rules, which is true. And also, yeah, it was also, that was the time, right? That was the era of design at that time. Very crunchy, very rules heavy. And I came up on those really crunchy games too, so. That was my best attempt at stalling.
So,
Yeah.
Gian's game is called the Snow Queen.
Oh, right.
I couldn't let that stand.
No, I'm
All
glad
right.
you found that. I'm glad you.
Robin Douglas, Robin Johnson, Robin Douglas Johnson, Robin Johnson. Robin Johnson made Grew Script,
Okay.
and it is. Oh, I lost my Zoom window. There we go. It it's a really slick, very easy to develop in, to code in, text adventure library environment, whatever. That you should check out.
Yeah.
I've been making a couple of little games in it. One of them is called Space Tug Blues. You drive an orbital tugboat, tug spaceship, around the solar system, docking with shipping containers and dragging them to the orbit they need to go into. And it in that game, it's heavily randomized. When you get to the shipping container, like it's been created randomly behind the scenes, and you have a contract and a shipping container, and they're going to match like 85% or something, and you have to decide what you're going to do with they're like, well, I have this contract, but they didn't tell me that the shipping container was broken in half. I have this contract to deliver agricultural equipment, but the shipping container's manifest says that it's weapons. Anyway, so GrewScript.
Yeah, I
GrewScript
definitely
is
checked it out.
A new development environment for
Nice for text adventures. Yeah.
Zork-like games.
Yeah, well,
It,
I don't know how many people are still into the text adventures. Like, there's, I think some people that have the, yes, like us, that have that nostalgia for that. I don't know. I played some games that were not, recently, that were kind of evocative of that were like reminiscent of that, or at least played on the nostalgia of that more recently. But so you already mentioned Apocalypse World through like 3rd edition. Being in the works. Is that the right terminology?
No, it is in the pre-works.
Pre-works.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable. Okay.
Yeah. And, the new book about Fury Road came out a couple of months ago. It's like the guy conducted like 230 original interviews with cast and crew on Fury Road, and compiled just this gigantic behind the scenes story about that movie. And that just came out this spring. And I was about a third of the way through it when I started taking notes for Apocalypse World 3rd edition. So it's inevitable. It's coming.
Yeah.
But it's not in a...
Gotcha.
It's 3 to 5 years away, probably.
I see. Well, I mean, I was going to ask you, like, I know you're still funding a game right now on Indiegogo, so maybe it's like the wrong question to ask, like, what's next after the last adventure? Do you have any what's next? Is there things on your mind? Anything keeping you up right now at night when you should be sleeping or watching a movie, creating?
Yes. So I can tell you some highlights. So first of all, we kickstarted a couple of years ago a game called Under Hollow Hills, and it is at the printer as we speak. And so immediately next is going to be delivering that book. Finally, I'm so excited to have that book in people's hands. And there are some things I really want to create for that game that I haven't started yet, some stuff. But so the immediate next thing is going to be getting that book out the door. I've been working on a sequel. This is one of those ones that's on the line, in the policy that it has to get me out of bed at night. I've been working on a sequel to Dogs in the Vineyard, and I don't want to make it.
That's so funny that you said that, because my mind was on Dogs in the Vineyard, and the fact that one, we never got around to talking about it. We kind of ran out the time to really dig into it. And two, I was curious, and I didn't think we would have time to really get into it, but whether you were going to revisit any of those ideas from Dogs in the Vineyard at any point. But yeah, well, so what makes you hesitant to do a sequel to Dogs in the Vineyard?
Well, okay. So Dogs in the Vineyard is unforgivable. And the sequel, is that you are private detectives in 1903, which is kind of a new thing, but not new. And you're from Chicago and you're going into Utah in pursuit of a kidnapping case. And to make that game worth making, it has to be about real world violence. It has to be a true crime game, not a fantasy game. And do I want to make a true crime game about Utah in 1903? And even if I'm compelled to do it, do people want a true crime game about Utah in 1903? And everybody I've said, you're private detectives in 1903. You take the train from Chicago to Utah in pursuit of a kidnapping case. Everybody has said, yes, I want that game to exist. But I don't know if they want that game. Like that game as a fantasy game.
Yeah,
sure.
Right.
But that game as a true crime game in the aftermath of recent genocide, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, it's hard to know, I think, whether, people, it's hard to know how much of a desire there is for the actual thing rather than the thing in theory, especially when the actual thing, I think to me, when I think about, I like superfluous. I like. Well, hold on. Be careful how I phrase this. I like both games that deal with like really difficult concepts. Obviously, I'm about to bring a tragic game to the market, and like I love games that deal with real things and real challenging things and real difficult questions and dig into philosophy and ethics and these things. I like that a lot. I also like the opposite, like very like silly or lighthearted or. Like, I like the full range. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes I wonder for like stuff that deals with like real world questions and issues and complicated and really hard ones, like real world violence, like real true to life real world violence. Yeah, sometimes I wonder if they're how much of people really want that, or how much they kind of like want it in theory, but in practice, not so much. It's hard to say.
And for myself, how do I make sure that I'm doing the subject matter justice in the game, not exploiting it, not, misusing it?
Absolutely.
And how do I, but even that, those personal artistic questions, if I can navigate those, should the game even exist? Is the work that's going to require worth the book that's going to come out of it? And who's my audience for that? I have this thought, but who is the audience for that? Who do I need to put that idea in front of? And maybe it's not us. Maybe it's not gamers. Maybe it's not anybody.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think though that creating the thing, and this is tough when it's a game. Games are meant to be like found by people who want to play it and played, but part of me wonders sometimes if just the act of creating that thing, it really depends on it, I guess, but I was going to say there's value in just making it if it's going to, for you as the creator, there's value in creating it, and then maybe just making it exist can be worthwhile. Again, that depends on the thing, and I think sounds like there's ethical questions at every level of releasing something like that, especially kind of in the wake of Dogs in the Vineyard. But that's a whole conversation that we don't have time for, honestly. So in the little bit of time left that we do have, though, tell people. I'll link it again. It's in the chat. The Indiegogo link. Anything you want to plug here before we say goodbye to folks?
No, check it out. I'm super grateful for your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see. I just linked it again in the chat. We can see literally live as we're recording this or streaming this. If people are watching this later on YouTube or whatever, it'll be at a different amount, obviously. But the game is 447% of its goal, which is great. And 11 days left. So in the time that's left, I hope people will check it out. Yeah. So that's. Go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
No.
447%.
Doing my math You're good.
I just got that right off the
like
page.
$8,000? No,
No. I got that right off the page there.
Yeah. It's fine. It was just me.
Yeah. So, Vince, thank you so much for taking the time to come on Holy Happy Hour. I really appreciate it. Maybe someday we'll get to. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thanks for so much. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a great time.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask.
Go ahead. Anytime.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll get to have that full-on Dogs in the Vineyard chat sometime. I'd love to talk about Western. Just real quickly, before we move on here, Westerns are like my first fantasy role-playing game. Was Western genre. So I have so that's put a pin in that. I always want to kind of talk about the Western genre and where everything surrounding what that means. And obviously Dogs in the Vineyard has a lot of religious content, and so obviously also one of my other interests. So yeah, we can maybe we'll get a chance someday to really kind of talk that one out and see where we go with that one. But Vince, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm gonna ask Vince to stick around here in my little digital green room on our call, and I'm going to wrap up with all of you watching this at home. Please stick around here for a minute as we just sort of wrap things up. Huge thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to Vince Baker for coming on the show. I'm so glad we got to kind of put this episode into works at the last minute because of a cancellation, so we didn't even get to advertise it last week on the show. So thank you all for coming out and joining us for it here. And if you only caught part of the show tonight, you can watch the whole thing. You can watch it on demand here on Twitch for a brief time where we're streaming this, or on YouTube where we're streaming this. You're going to be able to watch it after the fact forever on YouTube or on our website, allportsopen.com. On Holy Happy Hour Batman's YouTube channel, you can watch all of our episodes in their entirety. We've got a lot of great episodes. Go find our episode with Meg Baker, Vince's wife, and watch. We have 2 of them, and they are great, really great conversations, and you're going to want, they're some of my favorites. You should definitely go check those out. Let's see. Before we go, we already talked about going and checking out Vince's game on Indiegogo. I hope you'll do that. Also, as I mentioned at the start of the show, in fact, I'll bring it back up here on the screen really quickly. I'm going to be funding a game here using Itch in July. My 2-player tragic romance game, Broken. This is a game about it's about identity and loss and memory and hope and healing in the face of tragedy, and it's going to be coming to Indiegogo. Nope, that's the wrong platform. I did it. It's coming to Itch, or itchfunding, the ebook of it in July. If you want to get notified on launch, you go to the website on your screen, bit.ly/brokenlaunch, and I will only send you one email when we go live so that you can find out that it went live. I would love to get a few more people on that list tonight while we're doing this, so if you want to head there, it would be awesome, and sign up for that. We'd love to have you. So we're going to, in just a moment, we are going to raid into our next show in the All Ports Open Network tonight on this Monday night, which is The Worst Days. The Monday Night Crew is doing a sci-fi horror game, and we would love for you to join them playing The Worst Days. Is an original horror game from All Ports Open, so don't go anywhere. And then a couple of other quick things. Next week there is no episode of Holy Happy Hour Batman. I'll be on vacation. Come back in 2 weeks. Gabrielle Robinson is going to be joining me on the show to talk about therapy and ttrpgs. It's a recurring topic on Holy Happy Hour. Really looking forward to that chat. And then we have also the week after that is going to be another recurring guest, I think for his 3rd visit on the show, Jason Cordova of the Gauntlet. So that's actually 2 Gauntlet related guests 2 weeks in a row there with Gabrielle and then Jason. Jason's going to come on the show this time to talk about Broken and kind of ask me all about my game. And we're going to talk all about the Broken campaign and the game Broken. And so that's in a couple of weeks. That's in 3 weeks. So stick around. Don't move a muscle because we are going to raid into the worst days right now. Don't even flinch. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to put up the thanks for watching screen for as long as it takes to raid. Please join me in raiding at least into the channel and showing everyone that Holy Happy Hour is coming on in. We're going to do that right now, so stick around. I'm stalling because I'm looking for my wait. Thanks for watching screen. Have the holiest and happiest of hours, my friends, and I will see you in 2 weeks with another great episode of our show.